Hey photographers, it's Kevin Kubota, and today we're going to photograph a high school senior. We're out at the park in the full sun, and I'm going to use a Speedlite and high-speed sync to get nice, soft, balanced light with the existing light that we have already. So in this situation, we have sunlight that's almost directly overhead. So all you need to do is to find a spot where the sun can be slightly behind you. Directly overhead is going to be a little tricky, so sometimes I look for a spot or an angle. There's almost always a place where you can put your model so that the sun is just slightly behind her, even if it's way overhead. Then it becomes a nice little hair light, and we use the sun as our second light source. The main light is going to be coming from a Speedlite inside of the LunaGrip, and the fill light is going to be the ambient or the existing light in the shade, basically on her face. And I want to set my exposure on my camera so that I'm about one stop under what normal exposure would be. That lets my ambient become the fill, and then I'm going to use my LunaGrip with a Speedlite to create the soft, nice main light, and that's going to be a normal exposure. I'm also going to look for a background that's relatively dark, that has some nice shapes and nice little shadows going on to create contrast with the model so that she really jumps out from the image. So all you need is one main tool, your LunaGrip and a Speedlite, and everything else is just coming from nature and finding the right spot, the right situation. So I think we're ready to go, and let's find Ari and let's get photographing. So lighting is all about really creating beautiful shadows. And one of the first things that we want to do is look for a way to create some soft, shapely shadows, and that's kind of the reason I'm using a large light source. The LunaGrip works perfect for that. It's about a 40-inch round disc, so you have the similar effect to a 40-inch softbox or an octagon-shaped box, which is really, really a beautiful light. You know, there's a term called chiaroscuro, which is an Italian word that's just fun to say, especially at parties when nobody knows what you're talking about. You say, I was working on my chiaroscuro today. Try it. Chiaroscuro.
I can't.
She's not, it's good, see how I impressed her? Like I could say it and she couldn't. That's what I'm talking about. So chiaroscuro is the quality of the shadows, basically. And that's what we want to do, is create nice, soft shadows. Before we get started photographing, we want to make sure that the flash, the Speedlite that I'm using right now, the flash head zoom is set to cover the full width of the back of the disc. And in this case, we're using a 40-inch disc. And at this position here, about 28 millimeters, maybe 24 millimeters, depending on your flash, is a good starting point to cover as much of the back of the disc. And that way you'll have as soft a light as possible. So once we have the zoom set, we're ready to start photographing. I'm going to position my main light. Since this is our only light source, the main light source, you want it to wrap as much as possible to get that beautiful chiaroscuro. And one of the techniques I use, I call from ear to here. And if you think about it this way, we're going to start at the model's ear with the back edge of our main light source and point the disc to here, meaning you, the photographer. So as you're looking through the camera and you look down towards the light source, you should just see a sliver of the front face of the light source, and you know that it's positioned properly. If you're seeing too much of the back of it or too much of the front of it from your position, then you know it's not quite doing the best it can at wrapping, so put it right about there from her ear to here. And then we want to have it slightly forward and slightly above her eye level to give a nice direction of shadow. Okay, once you've got that set, you need to set your exposure. I'm going to set my exposure because I have a nice dark background. I want the background to help pop her out of the scene, so I chose that dark treed, foresty background on purpose, and I want to underexpose it about 1 f-stop. Now even with that down 1 f-stop, my shutter speed on my camera is going to be about 640th of a second, which is above the normal sync speed. We're into the high-speed sync zone, and I also want to use, say, f4, maybe even f2.8 to get a really shallow depth of field. So you're going to have to be into that high-speed sync zone, and this works really well, especially with your Speedlite and a LunaGrip, because it just all gels together nicely. So we'll set the exposure, manually adjust there, and I'm ready to start photographing. All right, so I'm going to have you lean on your elbows forward just a little bit, look up towards the disc. One of the other things that I try to do is to make sure that that light is shaping her face as much as possible with what we call short light, meaning that it's going to come into this side of her face, and the side of her face that I'm seeing with my camera is the broad side of her cheek here. So that's where the shadows are going to fall. So for the most part, the light comes from the short side of her face. The wide side of her cheek falls into the broad, which is the broad side of her face, falls into shadow. And that slims her face, gives her a nice jawline. It's just a more flattering light. If she was turned this way and my light source was on the other side, that'd be called broad light, and that tends to widen the face, which works well if you have someone with a very, very thin face, but for most people, most of the time, that short lighting is a much more flattering and much more interesting looking light, and so that's what we're gonna go with. I also tend to position my light source to the left of the frame almost always, and the reason for that is we read, as Americans, we read from left to right, so we expect things to happen in a scene from left to right. So generally when you see light coming in from left to right or someone looking out of the frame to the left, your eye scans across and it feels more natural. Now sometimes if they were to have something on this side of their face that you want to hide and they really need to turn that way, or the part in their hair is different, they need to turn that way, it's okay, but if I can, I'll have her looking left and my light source on the left to give a more natural reading of the way the light hits the subject. So something to try if you haven't thought about that before. You might try it both ways and see how you like it. So let's start going. So there you have it, a quick and simple senior portrait. We just use one light, and the key here is to balance your main light, your flash, with the high-speed sync function, makes it easy to do, with your ambient light. And that's all that really matters here, is to have a nice little balance, setting the ambient light about one stop under, use your sun as your hair light, and one flash is all you need, and you've got beautiful, soft, wrapping shadows and great light for a senior portrait.